The rain started suddenly, the kind that erased the sky and turned the quiet street into a blur of gray. And Emily Carter noticed it while standing alone in her kitchen, listening to the clock tick louder than it should in a house that felt too big for one person. And as she watched water race down the glass, she thought about how her life had slowed since the divorce, how evenings stretched long and empty, how even the sound of rain felt like company now. And she was lost in that thought when a knock broke through the storm, soft but urgent, pulling her back to the present. And for a moment she didn't move, because no one ever knocked on her door anymore. Not this late, not in weather like this, and when the knock came again, firmer this time. She walked to the door with caution mixed with curiosity, opening it to find Lucas Miller standing there, soaked through, shoulders tense, eyes apologetic. The neighbor's son she had seen grow up from a distance, now taller, older, standing in the rain like someone who didn't know if he was welcome. And he spoke quickly, explaining that his car had stalled, his phone had died, and the rain had left him with nowhere to go for a moment, and Emily saw the truth in his face, the discomfort of asking for help, the relief when she stepped aside and let him in, and as the door closed behind him, shutting out the storm, the house felt different. Not louder, just less still. And she noticed details she hadn't expected. The way Lucas thanked her twice. The way he stood carefully on the mat so water wouldn't spread. The way he looked around as if entering a space that mattered. And Emily handed him a towel without thinking, moving on instinct rather than reason. And as he dried his hair and smiled, she felt something shift, not attraction in a sharp way, but awareness. A sudden sense that time had moved on without asking her permission, that the boy from next door was gone and someone new stood in his place. And they spoke quickly at first, small talk filling the space, comments about the weather, the neighborhood. How long it had been since they last spoke, and Emily realized she was talking faster than usual, as if afraid the moment would disappear if she slowed down, and Lucas listened, really listened, nodding, responding with ease, not distracted, not rushed, and when the rain thundered harder outside, he laughed lightly and said it felt like the sky was falling apart. And Emily surprised herself by laughing too, a real laugh that echoed briefly in the room before settling into something warm. And she led him to the kitchen, offering tea because it was what she always did when she didn't know what else to offer. And as the kettle heated, she noticed how natural it felt to have someone there, how the silence between sounds didn't feel heavy anymore. And Lucas talked about coming home after college, about remote work, about how strange it felt to return to a street that hadn't changed while he had. And Emily found herself relating more than she expected, sharing small pieces of her own story without planning to, mentioning the divorce without details, the quiet house without complaint. And neither of them lingered on sadness, but it hovered gently between them, understood without explanation. And when the lights flickered for a second, the storm pressing closer, Emily felt a brief rush of unease, followed by calm, because she wasn't alone. And Lucas noticed it too, glancing up, smiling as if to say everything was fine. And in that simple look, Emily felt steadied, and time moved faster than it should have. Minutes slipping by unnoticed, the rain still loud but no longer threatening. And when Emily realized how long Lucas had been there, she felt a strange mix of surprise and reluctance. Because part of her wanted the night to keep unfolding just as it was, uncomplicated, unexpected, and safe. And as Lucas checked the window and said the rain might slow soon, Emily nodded but didn't stand, didn't rush the moment. And instead took a breath, feeling something she hadn't felt in a long time. A sense that life still had turns she hadn't seen coming, that even on an ordinary street, on an ordinary night, something could happen that shifted the air. And as the storm continued outside, Emily understood that this was more than a neighbor seeking shelter. It was the beginning of a moment she would remember. It's the kind that starts quietly, with a knock, and leaves a mark long after the rain stops. Asterisk, the kitchen felt warmer than before, not just from the heater or the tea, but from the quiet energy that settled between Emily and Lucas as they sat across from each other. The storm still moving restlessly outside while time inside seemed to speed up, and Emily noticed how easily the conversation flowed now. No pauses, filled with awkwardness, no need to search for safe topics, because Lucas spoke with an openness that surprised her. Talking about his work, how he spent long hours on a laptop but still felt restless. How coming back to his childhood neighborhood made him feel both grounded and out of place. And Emily listened closely, drawn in by the honesty in his voice. Finding herself responding without overthinking, sharing how the house had once been. Loud with plans and shared routines, and how it now echoed in ways she hadn't expected. And Lucas didn't rush to change the subject or offer advice. He simply nodded, letting her words settle. And that alone made her feel seen. And when she laughed about small, ordinary things like forgetting where she left her keys or burning toast in the mornings, Lucas smiled as if those details mattered, and the rain hit harder against the windows, almost like punctuation, pushing the night forward, and Emily realized she hadn't checked the time once, which felt unusual for someone who usually counted minutes to fill silence. And Lucas leaned back slightly, relaxed, asking her about the neighborhood when she first moved in, about the memories tied to the street, and she told him about fresh, paint unopened boxes and hope that had once felt solid. And as she spoke, she noticed his expression change, not pity, not curiosity, but understanding. And that made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. And the lights flickered again, longer this time. And the house fell into a softer glow, and Emily felt her pulse quicken before Lucas spoke calmly, saying storms here often tested the power lines, and his steady tone eased her. And she realized how comforting it was to have someone react without panic. And the teacups sat half empty now, forgotten, as their words moved faster, covering music they liked, places they wanted to see. Simple dreams that had been set aside, and quietly waited, and Emily noticed how Lucas spoke about the future with care. Not urgency, as if he understood that rushing only led to disappointment. And that thought stayed with her, because she had once rushed everything, believing speed meant certainty. And as the rain softened briefly, Lucas stood to check the window, and Emily felt a sudden, unexpected pull of disappointment, a sense that, if he left too soon, the warmth would leave with him. And when he turned back and said the rain hadn't slowed yet, relief washed over her before she could stop it. And she covered it with a smile, standing to refill the kettle even though neither of them needed more tea, just needing movement to ground herself. And as she reached for the kettle, Lucas thanked her again, his voice quieter now, more thoughtful, and Emily paused, realizing how rare gratitude had become in her life, how often gestures went unnoticed, and she looked at him and said it was no trouble at all. And in that moment, the house felt less like a place she was waiting out time and more like a space where something was unfolding. And the storm outside no longer felt like an interruption, but a reason, something that had pushed two lives briefly into the same room. And as they sat again, closer this time without meaning to be, Emily became aware of small details. The way Lucas chose his words carefully, the way he listened before speaking, the way he never crossed into anything uncomfortable. And that respect mattered more than she expected. And when he spoke about his parents, about wanting to support them while also building his own life, Emily felt admiration rise quietly, mixed with something she wasn't ready to name. And she reminded herself that this was just a conversation, just a moment, but her heart disagreed, beating faster, urging her to stay present, and the rain began to slow at last, the sound softening, but neither of them moved. And Emily realized that even when the storm ended, this moment might linger, because something had shifted inside her, something gentle but firm, like a door opening without force. And as Lucas glanced at the door and then back at her, Emily understood that part of her hoped the night wasn't done yet, that whatever this was, it deserved a little more time to breathe. The rain finally began to weaken, its loud rush turning into a steady tapping that felt almost distant. And Lucas checked his phone after Emily found a charger, watching the screen light up with missed calls and messages that pulled him back to reality. And for a brief moment the air shifted, the warmth between them meeting something heavier, and Emily noticed the change in his face. The way his shoulders straightened as if he had made a decision, and when he looked up at her, his expression was serious but calm, not rushed, not dramatic, just honest. And he said her name softly before explaining that there was something he needed to say before he left. And Emily felt her chest tighten without knowing why. Her instincts telling her this moment mattered, and she nodded, giving him space to speak. And Lucas admitted that the rain had been real, the car trouble real, but his reason for knocking on her door had gone deeper than that, because for months he had noticed her quiet routines. The way her lights stayed on late, the way she moved through the days alone. And he said he never meant to cross a line, never wanted to make her uncomfortable. But he had carried a feeling he didn't fully understand, one built on respect, concern, and a quiet pull he tried to ignore. And Emily listened without interrupting, surprised not by his words, but by how gently he said them, how carefully he avoided blame or expectation, and when he admitted that tonight felt like a chance to finally be honest, her thoughts raced. Memories of her past mixing with the present, reminding her of how trust once felt easy and how loss had taught her caution, and she took a slow breath, steadying herself before responding, telling him she hadn't expected this, that she was still learning how to live inside her own life again. And Lucas accepted her words without pushing back, saying he understood completely and that he wasn't asking for anything in return, only wanting her to know the truth before walking away. And that restraint moved her more than any bold gesture could have. And when he stood and reached for his jacket, Emily felt a sharp sense of urgency, not panic but awareness, as if a door was closing too soon, and she walked him toward the door in silence. The house feeling different now, filled with something unfinished, and Lucas paused at the threshold, rain still falling lightly behind him, and thanked her again for the shelter, for the conversation, for listening. And Emily surprised herself by stepping closer, not to stop him, but to speak honestly, telling him that his words had reminded her she wasn't invisible, that after a long time of feeling closed off, she felt awake again. And Lucas met her eyes, hope flickering there but held in check by respect, and he said that was more than enough, that sometimes knowing you've been seen is its own kind of beginning. And as he stepped outside, Emily stood in the doorway longer than necessary, watching him walk back toward the street, the rain no longer hiding him, and she realized her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear but from emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. And when she finally closed the door, the house felt quiet again, but not empty, filled instead with questions and possibilities. And Emily leaned against the door, letting the moment settle, understanding that nothing had crossed a line. Nothing had broken the fragile balance she had built, yet something had changed deeply. Because honesty had entered her life without force, and as she walked back into the kitchen, the cups still on the table, the chair still warm, she knew that whatever came next, this night would stay with her, not as a mistake or a regret, but as proof that even after heartbreak, the heart still knows how to respond when truth knocks softly and waits to be heard. The storm had finally passed, leaving the streets slick and reflective, the smell of wet asphalt mixing with the faint scent of earth and leaves. And Emily stood by the window, watching Lucas walk slowly down the street, his figure small but steady against the glistening pavement, and for a long moment she didn't move, feeling the quiet weight of the night settle around her like a soft blanket, realizing that what had happened inside her house, in the span of a few hours, had shifted something in her that she hadn't expected, a gentle stirring of hope, curiosity, and a connection she hadn't felt in years. And as she turned from the window, she reflected on every word, every look, every pause that had passed between them, noticing how Lucas had spoken with honesty and respect, how he had revealed feelings without pressure, and how she had responded. Not with shock or discomfort, but with acknowledgement of her own longing for companionship and understanding. And in that reflection, she recognized that sometimes life offered small, quiet miracles, moments that didn't scream for attention but whispered with clarity. And she walked slowly through her living room, touching the furniture she had arranged so carefully, thinking about the warmth of the kitchen, the smell of tea, the soft hum of conversation that had filled the space where silence once reigned. And she realized that the evening had reminded her of what she had missed most, not excitement or drama, but presence, someone who could share words, laughter, and understanding without expectation or hurry. And as she moved toward the front door, she felt a gentle urge to imagine what could come next. Not demanding certainty, not hoping for a romance written in the stars, but acknowledging that life could surprise her in small ways, that human connections, even brief ones, carried weight and possibility, and she remembered the way Lucas had paused at the threshold. That look in his eyes that held both hope and respect. And she understood that respect mattered more than grand gestures, that the simplest acts of honesty and courage could leave lasting impressions. And she smiled quietly to herself, realizing that the rain had been more than a storm it had been. A catalyst, a reason for a door to open and to people to meet beyond casual greetings and neighborly familiarity. And she sat back at the kitchen table, noticing the half-empty cups, the chair that still held warmth from his presence, feeling the lingering energy of a conversation that had been honest and gentle. And she reflected on the contrast between the storm outside and the calm inside, realizing that sometimes challenges or disruptions in life, like sudden rain, pushed us into moments that revealed our hearts more clearly. That tested our willingness to be open, and she thought about Lucas's words, how he had admitted his feelings without expectation, how he had respected her boundaries, and how that honesty had awakened something in her she hadn't allowed herself to feel since before her divorce. And she felt a soft, almost thrilling awareness that life could still hold surprises, that connection could appear when least expected, and that her own heart could respond with curiosity and care instead of fear or hesitation. And she rose to look out the window again, noticing the reflections of streetlights and puddles, the quiet houses lining the street, and imagining Lucas returning home, thinking about how tonight had changed something intangible. The way trust and attention could shift the way one perceived the world. And as she stood there, a thought struck her sharply. Sometimes moments weren't about endings or beginnings. They were about noticing, acknowledging, and letting life move at its own pace. And she felt gratitude for having allowed him inside, for having shared warmth and conversation, for having given a small opening to possibility. And she realized that the night, though ordinary in its storm and its end, had left a lasting impression, a quiet story of connection, care, and the courage to speak truth. And as she finally turned from the window, she felt her chest lighter, her mind alert, and a soft smile playing on her lips, understanding that some of the most meaningful experiences came in ordinary ways, through kindness, honesty, and openness, and that she would carry this evening with her, remembering not the rain itself, but the moment she and Lucas shared, the way words and presence could awaken hope, the gentle proof that even after loneliness and heartache, life had the capacity to surprise with warmth, connection, and the soft thrill of human understanding. And as she moved through the quiet house, turning off the remaining lights, she felt the night settle like a promise. A reminder that sometimes a simple act, letting someone in from the rain, could leave an impression far beyond the hours it took. That every conversation and glance mattered, and that the heart, even after years of guarding, could still recognize honesty, care, and the possibility of something real waiting just beyond the storm.